Alex Eala continues to thrill the crowds in Toronto as she chases back-to-back titles.
From Switzerland, Belinda Bencic!
Belinda Bencic came through a marathon tussle with Taylor Townsend.
The moment the final backhand clipped the top of the net and dropped heavily back onto her side of the court, the arena fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Alex Eala stood near the baseline, her chest heaving, staring at the yellow ball as it rolled to a dead stop. There was no theatrical racket smash. There were no dramatic screams or tearful collapses onto the hard court, just an ice-cold, unbroken composure that made the loss hurt even more. After a grueling, high-voltage winning streak that had captured the imagination of millions across continents, the miracle run in Toronto had finally come to an agonizing end at the hands of Belinda Bencic. By the time you finish listening to this video, you will understand why this exact defeat is not the tragic end of a story, but the exact moment a worldwide movement crossed the point of no return. If you've been standing in this corner since day one, watching every point, feeling every heartbeat, and carrying the flag alongside us, subscribe right now and stand proud with the rest of the global Filipino army. We are the room where the true believers talk, and today we talk about what happens when an unstoppable force finally meets an unmovable wall. For 3 continuous weeks, Alex Eala did not just play professional tennis, she hijacked the global sports conversation. She walked into stadiums as a 21-year-old from Quezon City and turned multi-million-dollar international tournaments into local home games. While her opponents on tour were fighting to protect their corporate image, defend their ATP points, and preserve their personal legacies, Eala was walking onto center courts carrying the absolute belief of an entire nation. The contrast was brutal and unavoidable. On one side stood established global superstars playing for prize money and ranking slots. On the other side stood a young woman playing for every overseas worker waking up at 3 in the morning to stream her matches, for every family driving hours across provinces just to wave a flag near the practice courts, and for a diaspora that had waited decades to see one of their own stand tall on the biggest stages in the world. To truly comprehend the sheer gravity of this moment, one must look closely at how the tennis establishment originally viewed her trajectory. For years, traditional analysts treat young prospects from non-traditional tennis nations as temporary novelties. They expect them to flash briefly in early rounds, collect their appearance fees, and quietly fade away when the real powerhouses step onto the court. But Eala shattered that entire corporate framework. She did not ask for permission to belong on center court. She commanded it through raw drawing power and uncompromising performances. The stakes in Toronto were unprecedented. Courts were selling out in 30 minutes flat. Organizers were forced to completely rewrite schedule boards on short notice, scrambling to move her matches from side courts to massive main arenas just to prevent dangerous crowd logjams outside the entry gates. Menu boards at the venue were altered to include traditional Filipino dishes for the first time in tournament history, reflecting a complete cultural takeover of the venue. Television ratings skyrocketed, press conference viewership numbers eclipsed those of multi-time Grand Slam champions combined, and the global media was forced to admit that a tectonic shift was occurring right before their eyes. When you analyze the psychological weight carried by both players entering this quarterfinal clash, the dual narrative contrast becomes razor-sharp. Belinda Bencic entered the arena as a proven veteran, an Olympic gold medalist, and a master of court geometry whose entire career has been forged in high-pressure pressure cookers. Bencic was playing to defend her standing, to silence the deafening crowd that clearly favored her opponent, and to assert the dominance of the established guard. Eala, on the other hand, was playing for something infinitely larger than personal ambition or ranking points. She was the tip of the spear for millions who saw their own struggles, their own quiet sacrifices, and their own resilience reflected in every single ball she struck. Standing across the net in the quarterfinals was Bencic, a player built specifically to dismantle tactical momentum. Bencic did not come to Toronto to be a background character in anyone else's story. She came to re-establish the traditional hierarchy, to execute a cold, mechanical tactical plan, and to prove that experience still reigns supreme when the pressure reaches a boiling point. From the very first service game, Bencic targeted Eala's secondary serves with aggressive return positions, taking the ball ridiculously early inside the baseline to strip away Eala's reaction time. When the crisis arrived in the opening set, it hit with the force of a freight train. Eala found herself down early, struggling to find her usual depth against Bencic's flat, razor-sharp ground strokes that seemed to skim harmlessly over the tape before exploding off the hard surface. Down 1-5 in the first set, with the Canadian crowd holding its breath and the commentary booth treating the match as an inevitable wrap-up, the timeline slowed down to an absolute crawl. In moments like these, standard young players usually crack. They look frantically at their player boxes, they gesture wildly at their technical coaches, or they surrender to the heavy, suffocating burden of global expectation. Eala did none of that. She walked calmly to her towel between points, wiped the sweat from her forehead, adjusted her racket grip, and stared back across the net with pure, unadulterated stillness. That stillness is rooted deep in the soil of Quezon City, built through relentless years of silent discipline away from home, and nourished by the fierce, unbroken spirit of a people who know what it means to fight from behind against overwhelming odds. In that arena, every time Eala won a single point, the crowd exploded with a physical roar that echoed like a championship match point. You could see overseas domestic workers holding handmade banners, families wearing custom-printed jerseys, and tears flowing down the cheeks of elders who never thought they would live to see a Filipina forcing an Olympic champion to play at her absolute limit. Eala mounted a heroic point-by-point stand, pushing through grueling baseline rallies that exceeded 20 shots each, engineering precise cross-court forehand winners and breaking back repeatedly to force Bencic into deep, uncertain waters. She saved break points with unbelievable courage, forced extended game deuces through sheer willpower, and refused to walk away without demanding every single ounce of blood, sweat, and tactical genius from her opponent. The physical taxation of that second-set comeback was astronomical. As the temperature on court soared and the rallies grew increasingly violent, you could see the physical toll beginning to accumulate. Yet even when her legs burned and her lungs gasped for air in the humid night, Eala refused to short points recklessly or resort to low-percentage trick shots. She stayed committed to the grueling grind, trading blow for heavy blow with a player who had spent over a decade dismantling the top 10 players in the world. Even though Bencic ultimately closed out the final set 6-4 after 2 hours and 35 minutes of absolute war, the proof stack accumulated over this epic run remains completely indestructible. Hard data does not care about bitter critics, cynical gatekeepers, or temporary scoreboard setbacks. Official tournament metrics confirm that no player ranked outside the top 5 in recent memory has ever produced this level of ticket demand, social media engagement, or international television rights distribution. Major media networks, former world top 10 analysts, and official tour executives have publicly admitted that Eala is currently the single largest audience driver in women's sports. Press conference video streams for her matches regularly drew well over 150,000 live viewers, completely outperforming the combined digital metrics of established tour legends by factors of 20-1. When traditional critics attempted to label her meteoritic rise as mere internet hype or short-lived media momentum, she answered directly on the court by eliminating top-seeded opponents, outplaying seasoned veterans, and forcing world-class champions to dig deeper than they had all season long. In the press conference room immediately following her brutal victory over Eala, Belinda Bencic sat down before the assembled international media, with the visible relief of someone who had just barely survived a major disaster. When asked about the electric atmosphere, the terrifying tension, and the relentless pressure from the crowd, the Olympic champion offered a deeply candid, respects-driven assessment of what it actually feels like to share a court with Eala right now. Bencic admitted that playing against Alexandra is no longer just a standard match against one athlete. It is a full-scale battle against an entire stadium, a massive demographic, and an unstoppable global movement. Bencic openly conceded that she had to execute near-flawless tactical tennis and suppress her own emotions just to stay ahead, praising Eala's remarkable composure, her lethal baseline depth, and her complete refusal to yield even when trailing by massive score margins. Shortly after, world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka, who had suffered her own shock elimination earlier in the tournament, delivered a statement that sent massive shockwaves through the entire sport. When questioned directly about the changing power dynamics of the tour, Sabalenka paused, looked directly into the camera lenses, and declared that in terms of cultural impact, crowd connection, and pure global inspiration, Eala is already operating at the very top of the world. Sabalenka pointed out that while official ranking points simply measure monthly performance across standard brackets, what Eala has accomplished by bringing millions of brand new fans into the sport and filling stadiums to absolute maximum capacity is something that even multi-time Grand Slam champions struggle to achieve throughout their entire careers. When you step back and look at the broader landscape of modern sports, moments like this are exceptionally rare. We live in an era of engineered superstars, carefully curated public relations personalities, and artificial hype cycles designed by marketing firms. But the connection between Alexandra Eala and her global audience cannot be engineered in a boardroom. It was forged in real time, built on shared identity, mutual respect, and an overwhelming pride that transcends standard sports fandom. When Eala steps onto the court, she carries the hopes of millions who have often felt overlooked on the global stage. That emotional gravity is precisely why an opponent cannot simply beat her by outplaying her technically for a few games. They have to break her spirit, and as Belinda Bencic learned over 2.5 grueling hours in Toronto, breaking Eala's spirit is an almost impossible task. The loss to Bencic breaks the physical winning streak on paper, but it cements the narrative foundation for the rest of Eala's career. Her opponent